Hello and welcome to Trying Times. My name is Carmen. If you're new here, then welcome. I hope you're having a wonderful day, afternoon, night, whenever you're listening to this, or morning. I started listing off all the parts of a day except for the morning, which is literally the first part of a day. So, off to a hot start here. But I hope you're having a wonderful day and I hope you're doing well. I am so glad you're here and I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to come and listen. So, yeah, thank you. This episode, I wanted to focus heavily on the idea of decision fatigue and being able to choose your heart over your mind, sometimes having to do the other, because life really kind of throws all kinds of curves at you, so you never really know. But a lot of the time, it's often that struggle to choose your heart over your mind, because that's typically what we always want to do, or usually tend to want to do. So yeah, that's my spiel leading into this episode. I'm sure with wherever you're at right now in life, you could probably relate to the idea of uncertainty to some degree, whether that's through relationships, your career, your general balance in your life. Maybe you're putting priority on other things and you're kind of like, shoot, maybe I should be paying attention more to this over this. All sorts of uncertainty in all kinds of places. And it's tough to know where to find the balance in these things. And sometimes when you're faced with a lot of decisions or you're stuck maybe at like a crossroads, it can feel tough because it's like you don't know which direction is typically the right one to go in. Or sometimes maybe you don't have this abundance of options or choices. You kind of just have to start from scratch and you don't really know where to go. And so, again, we find ourselves often leading towards what's probably right or what's probably best. And yeah, if that's not life, I don't know what is. I'll be honest, the last week or so for me has been pretty interesting. I won't get too heavy into it, but I recently lost my job, so that's a fun time. No, it was not really a great time. And to be honest, it was for more of, I guess, company related reasons. So I really had no control over that. No matter how much work I was putting in, that wasn't really dependent on that. And that happens sometimes. It happens in different places in different companies where they're doing a lot of restructuring or things are changing and that's just how it goes and that's okay. There's always going to be situations like that. And I know a lot of people have very relatable scenarios to what I'm kind of going through myself right now. So I've definitely found solace in going on TikTok and knowing that I'm not alone in that. And it's kind of cool. It's like a separate little community in itself. Obviously, we're all faced with many decisions and tough choices or moments in our lives. If you're going through that right now, then I understand how you're feeling. It's not the most fun feeling, but also it's a great time to look at how you can develop yourself. And this doesn't just have to be in a career sense, but it could be in the sense of caring for yourself, doing things that you've maybe always wanted to do, trying something new, finding new hobbies, that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of how I'm focusing on it and taking the time to stick to a daily routine where I'm taking care of myself and learning new skills and picking up new hobbies and that sort of thing. Yeah, looking for the next best thing for me and just kind of sort of seeing what that might be. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I feel like I'm in quite the pickle here right now because I myself have a lot of choices to make and a lot of decisions to make. And so I felt like this episode came at a very good time. Like I had written this down in my notes that I wanted to talk about this, but the timing is kind of crazy because I was going to talk about this without anything as a direct reference or a current reference in my life, but this is honestly a great time for that. So, yeah, we'll be talking about all of that kind of stuff. If you're in that position right now, like I said, and you can relate to that, just know I'm here for you. And if you ever want to talk or want some funny TikToks, feel free to reach out on Instagram at the Trying Times Podcast because, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of really, really great TikToks, some just super funny and some very resourceful and helpful about how to handle this time and how to, focus on yourself and kind of recenter your life to focus more on you and be better. So, yeah, if you ever want to see any of those, feel free to reach out. So, there's that. But The idea of decision fatigue and just making decisions, I think, starts so much earlier in your life than just with your career. For a lot of us, it can start from a very, very young age when maybe you want to go into some extracurriculars, but you just don't know what you like. So you kind of have to try out a bunch of different things. If you're fortunate to do that, then that's wonderful. But it can feel very daunting and scary at the same time. I'll add that in. Because sometimes maybe you try something and you're good at it, but you don't really like it, but it feels like it's probably the best thing to stay there because you're good at it, but you don't find any joy in it. That's a weird crossroads. And in that matter, it's kind of like, how can I choose my heart over my head? And what I'm thinking is right versus what I want. So that's a good example of how that might feel at a young age. Or even for instance, in my scenario, I've always been heavily into the arts and very minimally into the idea of athletics. As an adult, I love working out. And I started this probably when I was like a teenager, but I love working out. I love exercising, but I'm not particularly into sports. And I never have been. I don't mind watching them, but just playing them, I don't have the coordination for that. But I can sit down and draw, I can write, I can read, I can, play around with like musical tones and instruments. And that is fun to me. But I can't kick a ball around. I can't do that to save my life, if I'm being honest. So even something like that at a young age, I always felt like I was kind of surrounded by people who were good at that stuff. And it felt like it would be nice to be in the know and be able to do those things, but I've never really had an interest in them in that way. So it just never panned out that way for me. And that was fine. I really started to hone into the artistic side of my abilities and take note of the fact that I really enjoyed the arts. And that's something that I could see myself working in or further developing some hobbies and skills in. And that's like a really great example for me, at least, of at a young age how that kind of impacted my life, I guess. I know in general, a big thing here is when you're in high school and you kind of get to that point of having to think about what you want to do next with your life. And it's really important to note that at this stage in life, I think everybody's at a lot of different stages. You could be at the stage where you're contemplating if you want to go to university or college. You could be at the stage where you're contemplating if you want to go into maybe trades and maybe do a different style of work from, doing something like university or college. Or you're at the stage where maybe you don't want to do any of the above and you want to just go, explore, learn, and work. And I think it's really interesting as a lot of people in those moments feel like I can assume they have to choose one over the other. I think the general next step that a lot of people take is going to university or college or some sort of post secondary program. And I can say for myself, I did. I was personally looking forward to it and really wanted that. So that was the natural next step for me. And I feel fortunate to have gotten to do that. It was a huge thing. And I still think back on it and I honestly love the experience. Despite the stress, I loved the experience. I'll say that from the bottom of my heart. It was a huge thing for me. So that was great. So there's that. I think for other people, on the other hand, who maybe don't feel like that's the next step for them or the general or natural progression for them, it can probably feel tough because in that instance, maybe you're around other people who are looking forward to that and sort of follow that progression. Or you have superiors maybe who are asking you if that's the next thing you're going to be doing and assuming maybe even that's the next thing you're doing and asking about what field you want to go into and what sort of area of interests you have. And I'm sure that can feel so overwhelming and daunting and just annoying too. I'm sure probably very annoying if anything. So there's that. I think it's interesting though how in some aspects of our lives like this, it's something that impacts in a great way to some degree now our career choice, our next steps, maybe even depending on how interested you are in your field of study, maybe that even impacts your interests as a person. For me, I can say in all honesty, I've always had an interest in media and pop culture and all of that stuff. And that is very much in the realm of what I studied. And it touched on things like marketing and broadcasting and a lot of other things under the umbrella of media and production, which I personally really, really loved and enjoyed. So for me, that was kind of a great fit and I was happy with that. So it kind of ties into my natural day to day of, if I'm watching a movie, sometimes I find myself analyzing it maybe a little bit more than I'd like to just because I was able to study something in that way and develop that skill set, which I really enjoy. For other people, maybe that's not the case. Maybe you're studying something just because you're like, hey, this could amount to a really wonderful, financial situation. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, and that's totally fine. So maybe you're not looking forward to thinking about your work in your everyday life or incorporating your work in your everyday life to some degree. And that's totally natural too. Because I think, honestly, if you have some form of separation, that's probably very healthy. So I think that's a great thing. But it is interesting how that sort of progression, even starting in high school, for this example, can impact your post-secondary choices, your career choices, furthermore, maybe even your personality, like I said. It's kind of interesting how it cascades into this giant thing. And it has a lot more weight to it than maybe we think about at the ages of like 16, 17, 18, because at that point in time, we don't really know very much, to be honest. We might think we do, but we don't know a lot except for what we're supposed to do next. And even that term of what we're supposed to do next, we don't even really know what that means or what that looks like. And that's scary because there's a lot of weight to that and a lot of emphasis on that and a lot of importance placed on that. And if you have a slip up, or maybe you don't get accepted to a school, maybe you got like your last pick out of the schools you applied to, or maybe you're studying something that you're not at all anticipating or interested in. It's really, really heavy, the toll that that can have on people. And I think that's very natural. It's depending on, who you are as a person again and the situation that you may or may not be in. But it is interesting. I think about that often. And I think often about how if I studied something different, I don't know that I would be totally the person that I am now. And I think often that it probably would have impacted me in a much different way. And I think that's really interesting when you start to rewind things like that a little. Obviously, don't do that too much because I don't think that's very healthy. We don't want to go into like a ruminating spiral here. But I do think it's interesting sometimes where if I look back and I think, okay, if I changed something like my field of study and studied something maybe that had a little bit more of a general consensus of stability, or chosen an industry maybe where there is a little bit more of that, expectation for stability and for a heavier financial income. I think that's something that sometimes does pop into my head. And when I think about that, I find myself getting almost like really deep in the weeds because I feel like had I changed even something that seems as small as my field of study, that it would have impacted everything else all the more. Again, me as a person, like my personality, maybe even go as far as impacting my interests a little bit more, impacting maybe the way I dress, the way I carry myself. I think everything ties very closely together in these sort of instances. So, at least for me, they do. So when I think about that, it's really interesting because I think we often overlook how heavy these choices can be or these decisions can be. And in some instances, maybe we don't. Maybe we put a lot of emphasis on them. I know I do, but it is interesting to sometimes like look back at that and think about that. And so, yeah, that's a very long-winded example. In another scenario, I think something that we're often faced with decision fatigue is something like shopping. Oh my God, we could break this up into different fields of shopping if you want. For starters, I'll just say grocery shopping. Crazy experience. You can go in looking for one product, like let's say you're going to find a specific type of cookie or cracker. You can go up to a shelf and guaranteed there will probably be at least like 3 to 5 different choices of the same product. And then you're really left up to deciding what you want, whether that's the way maybe ingredients are marketed, maybe it has something to do with the cost, maybe it has something to do with if somebody recommended that to you. There's like a variety of things here that can really impact our decisions in that sense. But it's also interesting to me that when you do look into the sort of psychological side of like grocery stores and the way it's all set up, it's set up in a sense that you're meant to kind of maneuver around the store, and where your line of sight falls or your eye line naturally falls is often where they'll place products that you might want more than not. And even going down that sort of like a shelf system, a lot of the time they'll place, like, for instance, like sweet things or maybe like junk food, I guess, more often that they might cater towards children so that if they're in a grocery store, they'll feel more obligated to actually pick up an item and be able to feel that excitement of wanting to get something because they picked it. So I think that sort of side of things is really like when you start to look into it, it's really interesting how a lot of the time, even when we're making our own decisions, it's not fully in our own hands. It's kind of premeditated in a sense. And I don't mean that in like a weird conspiracy way by any means. I just think it's interesting how we are met with so much selection, and sometimes choosing one specific thing can feel like, oh my God, finally made this decision. But even then, sometimes it's not fully your decision. Sometimes maybe it's set up in a certain way to make it feel a little bit more obvious that we want something over something else. And yeah, there's like tons of documentaries about this. There's tons of things you can read online about this, about grocery stores in particular. It's really interesting when you start to look at that in that aspect. And tying it back to school, that's something I actually got to learn about a little bit on the marketing side of things. And I found that really fascinating. Just the sense of a lot of things that are in the realm of marketing can tie to psychological factors. And so something like a grocery store is like a jackpot when it comes to that, because there's so much they can maneuver around. There's so much space to work with. There's so many platforms that you can work with. Again, like there's tables, there's shelves, there's fridges and freezers, if you will. Like there's countertops and all these sort of things where everything's maneuvered in a way that's meant to pull you in and sort of capture your interest. And I find that really, really fascinating. And I'm not gonna lie, I fall prey to this all the time. Like, I'll go in, and if there's like a pack of cookies in the front, I'm just like, ooh, like I did not come in for cookies. In fact, I probably came in for fruit or vegetables or something, trying to be healthy. And now I see these amazing like baked goods all laid out in front of me, and I'm more than likely gonna leave with one. So I'm not saying I don't fall prey to this, because I most definitely do. But it is really interesting. If that's something that you want to learn more about, I would highly recommend checking that out, because there's a lot out there, and it's pretty crazy, I'm not gonna lie. So that's one aspect of shopping. The next aspect of shopping is clothing, makeup, a lot of just retail therapy in general, if you will. It could be anything. I think these things have been around, and retail therapy's been around for so, so long, but in the recent years with something like TikTok, oh my God, it's insane how fast something will get highlighted on TikTok, like a product. In this instance, let's say makeup. I have a very specific example in mind for this. This is a good one. But I think something like makeup is very easily highlighted and becomes trendy on something like TikTok or even Instagram. And when you notice maybe one or two videos of a certain product, let's say you want to learn more about it, so you go into like Sephora or a makeup store to learn more about this product. You go in, and lo and behold, it's either low in stock or out of stock because everybody's flocked to buy it. It works very fast in this sort of like grapevine matter where everything catches such fast wind that it just goes. And then the next thing's there, and then that goes. And then the thing after that's there, and that goes, and so forth. And it just keeps going on. And I find that really interesting, because sometimes, and don't get me wrong, more than often, probably than not, I think a lot of the products that catch wind and get really popular do for a good reason. Sometimes it can be the most random shit. Like, sometimes it can be the most random thing in the world that like you're not going to need for a very long time or in a bigger supply. But now it's like, for instance, eyeshadow palettes were a huge thing when I was growing up. And they had some really amazing ones at that time, like the Naked palettes and so forth. There were so many. And there was like release after release at a certain point. And I mean, everyone who loves wearing makeup, like, you're getting use out of it. But I know many people who, myself included, who still have these palettes from way back, and it's like we're still using them because there's so much product in here. So granted, at the time you got it, you felt that satisfaction or gratification, you were excited, which is all totally valid, by the way. It was awesome. Like, it was a great feeling to be able to get something like that. And then you use it a couple times and you're kind of just like, ah, okay, yeah, like I'm good. I'm good. And that's typically how things work, right? When it's a trend, same with clothes. It's sometimes hard, and I bring this up as an example, to not go ahead and do that, because you're, to some degree, if you're scrolling through TikTok and you see one makeup product or skin product, if you see it two times, you're like, okay. You see it three times, you're like, all right, now. You see it more than three times, you're not, I'm not saying you're going to be like, let me go buy this now. But there's a good chance you're going to be like, okay, finally, let me go and look at this product online and see what people are saying about it. Because clearly enough people are talking about it. So now I want to know what's going on here too. You go and you look at it. Maybe you're sold on it at this point. And so you eventually go in and you buy it, or you order it online. And then you get it, and maybe, this goes one of two ways. Maybe you really like it and you use it often. Maybe you really don't like it, and that's the end of that. You could return it. I guess there's like a third level where it's like you like it for a little while and then you're just left with a lot of supply. Like it goes in a lot of different directions, I think. And I find that really interesting because even though a lot of the time in this example of going into a store like Sephora, you are met with so many different brands, so many different products that all have different purposes and different use. And I find it really interesting because in that instance, you could go in and you could do really anything you want and choose anything you want and feel good about it. And if something works out for you, it's really exciting. But it's also tough on the other hand of if you're not aware of what you want, or maybe you're not coming in from a trend. If you're going in there and let's say you're like, hey, I feel like buying a mascara. There's like, I don't want to put a number to it, but I don't know how many mascara styles or types there must be in Sephora. There's a lot. Same thing with going to a drugstore. And if you decide to look through their makeup section, you can be like, okay, I want a mascara, maybe that like, adds volume. Okay, cool. You have like a criteria that you want to follow. Like a lot of them will say they give volume. So I think that's really interesting too, because it's this thing of like, okay, I know what I want and I came here to get it, but now which one do I get? Like, I don't know. There's so many options here that I just don't know what to do anymore. It's a lot and it's exhausting sometimes. I know for me at one point in time, I wanted to buy a new foundation and I went into the store and I went to look for one and I got so overwhelmed that I just like I put it off for probably a month and a half because I was like, this is too much. I came in looking for one thing, but I saw so many things that I don't even know what I want anymore because it's just so much. So it's really, I think, when it comes to things like shopping, decision fatigue is very real and it happens to everyone at some point with something. For me, I just say makeup because it's a huge thing that I like to shop for. It happens with clothes too. I'm definitely someone that's gotten pickier with buying clothes as I've gotten older. So if I find something in a store, maybe I'm not particularly a fan of the material, I will wait to go find the version of that piece of clothing that I really want or that I really like. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm starting to want to buy things that are maybe a little bit better in like material makeup or in quality and be things that I can keep for a long time and wear for a long time in a number of ways. So now I kind of don't have that desire to go and just buy like a million and one things, maybe in the way that I did when I was younger, and that was a time too, but now it's sort of like a shift in that aspect too, which helps, I think, when it comes to something like decision fatigue, because I have this very specific criteria in my mind. And sometimes it's not even met for a long time. Sometimes I'll like set out to look for a sweater of some kind and then I won't find it for months. And then maybe one day I'm in a store walking around and I just find something that meets all the criteria of what I want. It's going to take a while, but it is worth it. And it definitely is more worth it than going through with the decision fatigue, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'll say that as my final sentiment. But yeah, now again, it's kind of closing this off with where I started the episode with something like careers. I think, oh my gosh, it's so easy to have decision fatigue, especially when you're applying to jobs or when you're looking for a job or you're sitting down maybe from the very basics and you're like, what do I want to do? Similar to that sort of sentiment of what I said about choosing your career path, maybe when you're in school. There's a good chance a lot of people are going to study a certain field and they're not actually going to follow that path for the rest of their lives because not a lot of people do, and that's just normal. So I think when it comes to those sort of things, always looking at your skill set is like the first thing. I think looking at your skill set and then also looking at the ideal of what you look for in a work environment or work qualities is like the secondary. And then furthermore, narrowing it down by niche. Obviously, when you're narrowing things down by niche or by a specific type of interest, the results will probably be very slim. But I think that's a really, really wonderful place to start because that's you looking at something that really means a lot to you and something that you have a better chance of having a higher interest in and probably have more joy working in. So that's what I'll say to sort of reduce that decision fatigue for career. I guess the same sort of scenario could also probably be used for if you're maybe deciding to go to school or deciding what to do next. I would say stick to those things. Stick to the idea of your skill set, your interests, sort of to speak, and then also narrow it down by niche. And I think that that kind of helps out. I feel like that's pretty generic advice, but I feel like it kind of helps. So hopefully it does. But yeah, that's everything about me ranting about decision fatigue. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And again, I really, really appreciate you for being here. And if you ever want to chat or talk about any decision fatigue or anything at all, feel free to reach out on Instagram at the Trying Times Podcast. Yeah, that's all for now. We'll talk again soon, okay? Bye.